This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the website builder built to build your brand. So we have a couple of IndyCar related things to discuss before we get to the coverage of Mid-Ohio this weekend. The first and most important thing is a story that has been a rumor for a long time. I think the first time I heard about it, well, really, the alarm bells were going off when the sponsor was first announced because everyone knew about the trials and tribulations of the Williams Grand Prix team in 2020 with their sponsorship woes, specifically with Rocket, however you want to pronounce it. And unfortunately, it seems like that has finally caught up to the AJ Foyt racing team. Now, what I thought when I first heard this was, man, I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did. Because if you think about it, I'm pretty sure they were there with the team in the 2020 season, at least for maybe one or two races. Certainly they were there through the entire 2021 season, and they expanded their presence this year to two cars with the 14 and the 11 cars. Of course, the 14 driven by Kyle Kirkwood, and the 11 is split between Tatiana Calderon and J.R. Hildebrand on the oval tracks. And so this is what the situation is right now. There's a statement from AJ Foyt Racing, and full credit to them. They've been very transparent, as they usually are. They're actually one of the more transparent teams in the paddock, so I have to give them a lot of credit for their PR efforts. And this is the statement they released on their website for everyone to read for themselves. The future of the number 11 Chevrolet beyond this weekend's race at Mid-Ohio is not guaranteed due to funding issues with primary sponsor Rocket, which team principal Larry Foyt is trying to resolve. And this is from Larry. We are trying to work through a difficult situation. As I know, Rocket wishes to continue the program, but there are some issues which may prevent that. We will either continue to resolve it with Rocket or try to find alternative funding, which is difficult at best at this point in the season. The number 14 entry will run the entire season as it is not solely dependent on the Rocket funding. So obviously this means that the number 11 car more or less will likely not continue throughout Mid-Ohio. Now it had been reported, I think Tony Donahue was one of them and a couple other people, that there had been some missing payments that Rocket eventually did pay to AJ Foyt Racing. Now that funding gets them through Mid-Ohio. Now beyond that, it seems increasingly more unlikely. And I would suspect that we probably won't see the 11 car the rest of the year. And it's really a shame for a lot of people that aren't just named Tatiana Calderon. Certainly, she was really the reason that this number 11 car was a full-time car or planned as a full-time car throughout the year because she did bring the backing of Rocket. But also, I feel bad for the crew. It sucks to see you go from 26 full-time cars potentially to 25 here. All the crew members presumably will at least change what they're doing at AJ Foyt Racing. They won't be going to the racetrack every week, and that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that they will get let go. I feel terrible for J.R. Hildebrand, who really performed very, very well in the first two races he got this year at Texas Motor Speedway and the Indianapolis 500. And if you think about it, Iowa was always one of JR's better tracks. So the fact that he won't get an opportunity at this time, or at least looking like at this time, he won't get an opportunity to go to Iowa and really give the Foyt team a good shot there is very disappointing, to say the least. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of fans probably won't notice, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of kind of flippant comments that say, oh, well, that car always ran at the back, who cares? Well, to me, I think the more cars on the grid, the more people involved in the sport, the better. And even if the team isn't super competitive, or the driver isn't super competitive, whatever you want to call it, I think it says something to the health of the sport that you can keep 26 cars full-time on the grid. And when you lose one, even under circumstances like this, it's a bad thing. And I feel bad for all those people who are, facing uncertain times right now because of this sponsorship dispute between Foyt and Rocket. And I hope it gets resolved. Really, the best case scenario would be that Rocket pays their bills and the car runs the rest of the season, JR runs the ovals, and Tatiana finishes out the season on the road courses, and maybe they put everything together next year to run three cars once again. The good news, I guess, in all of this is despite the fact that Rocket is on the number 14 car and presumably will be at Mid-Ohio, that car, regardless of what it says on the side of the car, will continue throughout the rest of the year with Kyle Kirkwood at the controls. And as said in that press release, the number 14 car isn't totally affected by Rocket. They have sponsorship from other parties, other folks have paid into that car, and certainly it definitely helps that Kyle Kirkwood brought that $1.5 million from winning the Indy Lights Championship last year, which will keep that car on the grid. But yeah, it's a shame for the Foyt team. I hate to see them go through stuff like this, and particularly for the crew members who may be affected by this. That's who I'm most upset for. So let's take a quick commercial break, get you guys a word from this video's sponsor, Squarespace. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about Aero McLaren SP and their potential future for a third car.
I don't know if you noticed yet, guys, but it is 2022, and if you don't have a website yet, you are falling behind. But don't worry, Squarespace is there to help. I was amazed when I used Squarespace how easy it was to create a totally unique website that truly fit in with my brand. There were some great features on the Squarespace site, including the easy integration of all of my social media platforms. You guys know that's a huge part of what I do. I was also amazed how quickly and easily I could set up some really cool things like put a video on the background of my web page. I'm someone who, as a kid, created a whole lot of websites through generic website builders, and I have to tell you that this was such a crazy experience. There are so many options. You really are not limited to the default setups. You can totally create your own website here, totally integrated with your brand, and that will help your brand grow. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/davidland to save 10% on your first purchase of a website or domain.
So, kind of buried last week, maybe not so much buried, but McLaren announced that Felix Rosenqvist had been re-signed to the team. Good news, because Felix is a good guy, and he deserves an opportunity to continue with McLaren, but it's not necessarily for IndyCar. The press release specifically said Formula E or IndyCar with McLaren, and everything I've heard behind the scenes suggests that it's going to go to the Formula E side of things with Felix Rosenqvist. But I do think it's interesting that the option, the contract is flexible enough to allow Felix Rosenqvist potentially to come back to IndyCar, presuming, of course, that a better option is not found, quote unquote, a better option is found to fill that seat. Now, all sorts of things have been made about who possibly could be in a third Aero McLaren SP car if it's not Felix. And I think, here's the thing, I think a lot of people over the last couple of races have noticed a performance increase with Felix Rosenqvist. In a lot of ways, he's outperformed Pato at times. And I think the Indy 500 with Pato and Felix both up there racing for the win, why would you want to break up that pair? I don't know. That's above my pay grade, I guess you could say. But if it's not Felix, the three names that have been mentioned are the same three names that you've heard mentioned several times before. The first one, I don't believe at all, is Alex Palou. Because number one, I don't think Chip would let him go. And number two, I don't think Zach Brown, unless there was just a tremendous amount of money, not only buying out Alex Palou, but also buying out Chip Ganassi, would Alex Palou go to Aero McLaren SP? I just don't see it at the moment. The other possibility, or the other two possibilities, are Scott Dixon, who just today, the Indy Star reported, got a quote from Scott Dixon that said, or that Dixon said that he had not been approached, or he had personally talked to Aero McLaren SP about any kind of a move to that team, which would also involve an ownership stake, potentially. That's what the rumor mill has suggested over the last couple of weeks. Now, that doesn't mean that his people haven't talked to Aero McLaren SP. I think that's a very important distinction to make. Just because Scott Dixon hasn't talked to him doesn't mean his people haven't talked to him. But I wouldn't say that's an unrealistic scenario. And I kind of am sticking to my guns that that I kind of said the last couple of weeks. I believe Dixon before I believe Palou. But the name that keeps coming up, and it was the first name I heard as a driver for that team, is Rinus VeeKay. Rinus is currently not able to negotiate a contract, and potentially that's why we have this whole scenario with Felix Rosenqvist being an and/or IndyCar, because even if Felix Rosenqvist is on the radar, Rinus VeeKay is on the radar at Aero McLaren SP, he wouldn't be allowed to negotiate until I think around August or September. And then once he's on the negotiating table, I'm sure all bets are off. He's been on the record saying if he could get to a better team that he could stay at long term, he would, but he's also loyal to Ed Carpenter Racing. But I guess at this point, if you're sitting there and you're Zach Brown, who do you pick right now to run that IndyCar or drive that IndyCar? Because Felix has looked very good in the last few races, and unfortunately Rinus has not. Rinus has had quite a few crashes. He was off the pace at Road America. We know how talented Rinus is, and I don't want to pretend like he's not a worthy person for that seat. I think he very well could be, especially if they give him the environment that he needs. But I wonder if he already has that environment he needs at Ed Carpenter Racing, because he's proven that he's capable. He's fast. He can be a pole sitter. He can set single lap track records at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, or at least for the pole, whatever we want to call that anymore. So he's clearly a capable driver, albeit a bit mistake prone. Now, that also describes guys like Colton Herta, so that's good company, right? You're not necessarily... That's one thing that's good, I guess, about the current era of IndyCar, is it seems like you're forgiven for your mistakes a little bit. It's not, unless you're driving for the Chip Ganassi 10 car, as long as you're not going out there and knocking down the walls every week, or if you are going out there and knocking down the walls every week, as long as you're fast, you'll have a place in IndyCar until you eventually get it, or maybe you don't, and then eventually you end up out of the sport. But I think VK's probably still the number one bet, I would say, for that seat. But certainly there's a lot of possibilities that it could be. You know, it could be Alex Palou. It could be Scott Dixon. But I think it's really more or less. I think you can definitely eliminate Palou, VK, Dixon, Rosenqvist. Those are the three drivers vying for that spot. And I guess we'll have to see how it all shakes out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoy my coverage of Mid-Ohio this weekend, and we'll see you then.